Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this session. This talk titled, Know Your Adversaries Through Genetic Analysis, a Strategic Advantage for National Certs. Before we start, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ari. I used to be a security researcher and the head of the IDF CERT team, the incident response team of the IDF. My team and I took care of every nation-state attack who targeted the IDF. And as you can imagine, we had a lot of things to do. I'm specializing in malware analysis, forensics, and reverse engineering. And I'm very much familiar with the unique challenges National Certs has. Today, I'm the VP of Research at Intezer. So let's start. I will share my screen. And we're good to go. I would like to start with some of the unique challenges that National Certs has, according to my perspective. First of all, in terms of forensics, you need to find the needle in a haystack, right? The true positive alert between all the false positive ones. It's not an easy task, and more than 95% of the alerts are eventually false positives. And not only that, sometimes you need to investigate and do forensics for media, such as hard disks, and sometimes even memory dumps. And it's a very hard task to do without getting all the context, and to do it at scale, it's something that is indeed challenging. Even after you got suspicious files that you want to investigate specifically, and you suspect that those files are malicious, classifying and attributing those samples, it's not something trivial. Usually, you need to have reverse engineering skills to do that in a certain level. And we all know that reverse engineering time is something that is very much expensive and also slow. It could take days to analyze a specific sample. Sandbox reports, for example, that should help you with this task, sometimes they all look the same, right? And you get this vague result, which is not that helpful in order to understand what is going on with this file. And even in the final step, when you already understand what is going on with this file, and you want to write the report and do the tracking for this specific threat, group, malware type, and so on, doing it based on hash is not something that is effective. This is something that is very easy for the attackers to change, changing the hash or the IP or a specific string. You don't want to base your IOCs on that. And of course, if you want to hunt for new samples or track the adversaries, you need to find more sophisticated way to do that than just relying on hash or IP. This is a screenshot of some of the existing investigation tools, which gives you like a vague answer, and it's not that clear to understand whether the file is malicious or not and what it does. For example, for this file, it says ambiguous, and it's malicious 41 out of 100. What does it mean, right? Here is a screenshot from VirusTotal that says this file is indeed malicious, right? But it's generic. Is it really generic, right? And this information is super important if you want to prioritize the alerts. So from my experience, you have a few questions you'd like to answer during handling an incident. First of all, as I said, whether this alert is false positive or true positive. But even if it's a true positive, you want to understand the risk level of this alert in order to prioritize it accordingly. As cert managers, you probably have more than one alert at the same time, and I think you'd act differently if you know that this alert is an APT in compared to ransomware or other tool. Now, in terms of seeing the bigger picture, it's very much important to understand whether this file is related to a previous incident you had in the past. And of course, you want to know how should you respond and remediate against this threat. For that, at Intezer, we've developed a technology called genetic software mapping, which basically helps us understand whether a file is good or bad based on the origins of the code. Technically speaking, we can take any binary file, could be Windows file, Linux file, it doesn't really matter. We dissect it after disassembling it to small fragments of assembly instructions that we call genes. Now, based on those genes, we've built a huge genome database that contains billions of those genes, both from trusted software, but also from malicious files. Now, for every gene, we have a lot of granular information, such as where have we seen it, how many times we've seen it before, who's the vendor who wrote it, and so on and so forth. Now, with that, once we have a new file which we want to investigate, we can run it in the genetic software mapping engine, extract the genes, and then compare them to the other genes that exist in our genome database. And based on the code we use, we can determine if the file is good or bad. Let's take this file as an example. If this file is a file that you got from one of your alerts and you want to understand whether it's good or bad, after running it in the genetic engine, we can immediately, after 3 seconds, show you that this code was seen in Red Hat Linux distribution. This code, which means that it's trusted, this code is malicious because we've seen it only in Mirai samples. This code was never seen before in the genome database, which is suspicious for itself, especially if you guys are worried from APTs. And we can show you the code that is what we call common. It's not the pure DNA of the file, so you should not waste time on analyzing it. It's not the main focus here, and you should focus on other things. So you can think of it as if you have army of reverse engineers analyzing each and every part of your, each and every file in your organization, and gives you deep insights of what's going on within every file. Now, the question is, what can you do with it, right? How can this technology help you with the challenges I just raised? So I prepared a few examples. First of all, it can help you classify and attribute threats. This is an example of how an analysis looks like in Intezer Analyze. I'm going to rescan the file just so you see it. It's live. This is the platform in production. And you can see that after a few seconds, you get this result. For this file I just uploaded, we see that the file is malicious and that the family is Lazarus. Now, for this specific file, we were able to extract 231 genes, and 81% of those genes were seen in the past under Lazarus family. Now, if I click on this family, immediately I get further information on what's going on with this threat. I see some synonyms here, description of this malware family, and of course, I can see the other samples that share code with the sample I just uploaded. So it's very interesting. Now, for the technical users here, we can even see the shared assembly code between the sample I uploaded and the Lazarus family. And I don't have to open IDA Pro for that. We do have a plugin for IDA Pro as well, and I'm going to show that to you right away. Now, the reason I choose to show this specific example is because originally in VirusTotal, this file had only one detection. This is how the analysis looks like from June. Only 1 out of 73 vendors marked this file as malicious. But when you look at it at Intezer Analyze, even back then at June, you can see that the file is indeed malicious. You can understand the classification of the file, right? It's indeed APT, since it's related to Lazarus. And you know that it's from North Korea. So you know the full attribution, and all of that within seconds, right? Those kind of conclusions would take, I'd say days for a reverse engineer to get to them. And he does not have all the database, the genes database as we have. Now, if I go down a bit, I can see here some further information about this file. And this is the section of the string reuse, where it's basically like the code reuse, but for strings. So you can see here some interesting strings that were seen only in Lazarus family. This looks like a log entry, can create file, error, and so on and so forth. So it also helps you understand and get a hunch of what's going on in this file. And more importantly, we can see here the section of your related samples, which helps you see the bigger picture. So for example, if you had an incident a few months ago and you analyzed a sample there, and now when you upload this file now on October, it had connections to the file you analyzed in the past, you'll see it here. And why is it important? To see the bigger picture, right? And not only treat incidents as independent units. So this is extremely useful. Now, everything you see here, you can access through the through API, obviously, and you can upload Windows files, Linux files, and a few different other formats as well. And now let's move on to the second example, where you can use this technology to analyze and investigate a whole endpoint. So if you want to do some proactive operations, or you have an alert on an endpoint, but you don't have a file, you can still use our technology to investigate the endpoint. And all you need to do is to ship a file that we built that scans the whole memory image. And for every executable page in memory, it scans it with our technology. So even if you have volatile threat existing on this machine, we will be able to detect it, although there's nothing on disk. And all of that takes a few minutes. So basically, this is the output of a machine that we scan the whole memory image. By the way, you don't need to do the dump by yourself. We do that for you, obviously. And you can see that in this specific computer, we have few trusted memory modules that are loaded. Most of them are Microsoft, but we also have few modules that are loaded and relates to Emotet. So this is actually, it means that the computer is infected with Emotet, and even if there is nothing on disk and this thread is fully volatile, you don't need to start working with volatility, memdump, and so on and so forth. You just execute a file, and after a few minutes, you get this report. And this is extremely useful when analyzing large networks, or you want to do proactive operations fast and quick. And it's all based on the technology I just described. So again, you can do that at scale, and it's very, very useful. Now let's go back to the slides, and we'll move on to the third use case that you can do with the technology. This one I like the most, which is clustering files based on code. And how you can do it is based on this map. So this is actually a real research we conducted in the research team at Intezer in a collaboration with Checkpoint. And basically, we wanted to map the whole Russian APT ecosystem. And we did it by collecting all the public reports regarding Russian actors in the past 15 years. We grabbed the binaries and we run them in the genetic software mapping we've developed here at Intezer in order to find the connections and the clusters between the files and the different organizations. So now I can zoom in and see the actual connections and relations between the samples. For example, this pink cluster here is was made by Black Energy, and you can see here all the different modules, file system plugin, screenshot plugin, and so on. You see that all of them share code with each other, and it even shares some code with the Pinchduke, which is another Russian group. Now, once you click on it, on a specific node here at this graph, you get this a sidebar with some further information about the group. This one is Geyser. Let me open something that has some more info. You can see some references to Uberus, Turla, synonyms, and of course reports and Intezer Analyze, where we base the connection on. And what's cool about that feature is that you can build your own map, right? So if you have a bunch of samples of actors that you're tracking or specific malware families which you want to cluster together to see the relations between them, you can do that using the Intezer Analyze API that I just showed you to build this graph. So this is a very useful tool for threat intelligence, and you can also use it to analyze trusted files. So if you have, for example, 100,000 trusted files, you can run them and build this cluster and then investigate only one file per cluster, because all the other files in the cluster looks pretty much similar to it. So for example, if you want to understand what's going on in this cluster, if you analyze this node and it's malicious, you know that the other files are indeed malicious as well. By the way, all this project is open source, the raw data and the GUI, and we'd love to help you in producing the graph for your own threats or actors. Of course, you can do it by yourself without sharing even the samples with us. If it's something private that you cannot share, don't hesitate and go for it. It's very, very useful. Okay, so a few more features I'd like to show you based on this technology. First of all, you can accelerate the reverse engineering process, which is extremely useful for reversers like me. I just opened IDA Pro and loaded a file to it. And this file, for example, has around 560 functions. And you know, the best reverse engineers know where to focus within this huge file. Otherwise, they'll have to go over each and every function here and start analyzing it, which could take a lot of time. So for that, we've developed a plugin that gives you the insights of the genetic software mapping engine, but within IDA's interface. So all you need to do after you loaded the file is to execute a plugin, and immediately, as you see, you get this output. You can see here function addresses and blocks, and of course the classification. So this block, for example, is common. Reminder, common is a common code, which means we've seen it in many, many files, could be trusted and malicious. So it's not the pure DNA of the file. Don't waste time on analyzing it. So what we can do is to see only the malicious genes without the common. Let's exclude the common. And right away, you see that this file is malicious and it shares genes with Lazarus family, right? So I can even click on a specific entry, and right away I get to the relevant code parts within IDA, and I need to analyze only those parts. We also added some inline comments here. So instead of going over from the entry point and go over every branch we have, we do it in a different way, which is way, way more effective, as you can see, and it can really save time and effort. So instead of spending days on this file, now it takes a few minutes. Now, not only that, but you can use the technology for threat hunting based on code. What does it mean? Let me show you this example. So I'll go back to the Lazarus sample we had before. And let's say that you want to track this specific threat, right? You want to know what is going on here. So for that, you can write Yara rule, which is very effective for hunting new threats. But in order to make the Yara rule effective, you shouldn't base it on IPs or strings, things that are easy for the attackers to change. But the best way to do it is to base it on code, right? Code is something that for the attacker is very much, it's hard to change. And if we'll base our Yara rule on code, every time the attacker would use the same code, we will get a notification. So since here at Intezer, we already know which code is malicious and which code is trusted, we can do that automatically. So all we need to do is to go here, click on Yara, and behind the scenes, we generate Yara rule for this specific file, which is based on the code. And this is how it looks like. You see here all the strings, and each one of those strings represent a code from this Lazarus file, a code that was seen only in Lazarus family and not in any other trusted software or malware family in the world. And of course, we have here the condition. If you want to be a bit more loose, you can change it, for example, to 10. Every time we see tens of those strings, we want to get an alert. You can do all of them if you want to hunt only this specific sample, but not based on hash. So if the attacker changes the hash, but the code is exactly the same, you will get a notification. And you can take this rule and deploy it, in VirusTotal, in your internal hunting platforms, and so on and so forth, and get notifications on this specific file, on this specific threat. So this is also like the next level of hunting. Instead of basing it on strings or IPs or hashes, which are easy for the attackers to change, here you base it on the code, which is the most powerful way to write a signature. Now we have a lot of other use cases for the technology, but we're running out of time. I wanted to share a few of the success stories we had at Intezer research team based on the technology I just described. So we found Linux threats, Windows threats, Chinese APTs, Russian APTs, Iranian APTs, and it's all based on the methods I just described. I'll be happy to explain that a bit more in private, so don't hesitate to reach me. And yeah, this is it. Thank you very much for the time, and I'm available for any question you may have. Thank you.